Hey YouTube, welcome back. I'm Richard Quiner. Welcome back to the RPG Daily and another great episode coming up of the Game Master's Craft. Today's guest is a beast when it comes to creating content that you can use in your home games. If you've seen his Instagram, it's one thing after another every day of stuff you can just put into your world, make it full, and make it really interesting. So we're going to get into that right now. Chace, welcome to the show.
Hey,
Thank
thank
you
you
for
for having
being
me.
here. Before we dive into me picking your brain about everything, why don't you tell everyone what is it you do and what is the content you create?
Okay, not a problem. I am at rollanat20 pretty much on all social media. You can find me mostly, I'm active on Instagram. I've been doing a stream with Lady Tiefling on Twitch, usually on Fridays. I'm trying to do more content on Twitter. We'll see how that goes. But basically, I create just a plethora of content. I think you put it great. I try to do a little bit of everything. I mainly focus on posting like side quest ideas because I always love just having a little something extra to throw at my guys if I need something to like if I need something just out of nowhere. I'm running a game I didn't expect to run.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm trying to put on there, so you have stuff for that. So I have side quests. I have items you can put on there. I have roll tables. A lot of people love my drink tables, so I have like magical drink tables on there. It's just a whole mess of stuff. Just anything I can think that you might just need to grab and go, that's what is on there.
Yeah, and recently I saw you were doing a D100 table recently. It looked like it was like once every couple days you had a post going up, adding 10 more, and I forgot what the subject was because.
Yes, I actually have two of those, and I'm working on the third.
Oh.
The two that are finished, I have one that's kind of unique. It's called Making a Monster. So basically, it is a randomly generated table of different attributes that you could add to a monster. So if you are running a game with some veterans and they are used to you throwing a griffin at them, they know the griffin's stat block from front to back, and you want to trip them up a little bit, you can
Mm-hmm.
pull out this table, roll a D100 on the table, and you can add some type of modifier to that griffin just to trip up your players or just to make things a little more interesting in general.
That's a great idea, and I think that's a good way to make combat even more interesting. Is when you have, a little unknown factor that the players haven't quite figured out. How do you come
Absolutely.
up with that though? That's 100 different things.
Um, Slowly over a large period of time, usually. And actually, that table is a 2D100. So there's actually two different columns of different things you can do to change the creature. So I usually I'll just go through it slowly over a few days, putting different things in there. I will say it is not play tested at all. Some of it might be horribly broken. So try it at your own risk. But I think that's the best way to figure out if something's broken. Just throw it out there and see how it goes.
Yeah, get some playtesting is a great way to do it. Now, before I keep picking your brain about this kind of stuff, I wanted to know how was it you got started in tabletop role playing games, and when did you start DMing your own sessions?
Yeah. Actually, I didn't start with D&D. I know that's surprising to a lot of people. I started with uh, uh, actually, I'm using that book as a stand. My computer's sitting on that book right now.
Oh,
But I started with Vampire.
oh, Vampire the Masquerade.
So yes, Vampire the Masquerade, Vampire the Requiem,
Mm-hmm.
just all of the World of Darkness stuff. I got into that back in like my early days of college. I spent nights playing that instead of studying. Uh, and then I've always loved writing and creating worlds and creating characters. So I think I played one game of Vampire, and the very next day I was like, "Hey, when can I run a game?" And immediately, like within a week or so, we finished our first game and we transitioned to mine, and I ran one for a while, and then I just wanted to try new things, so I tried Mutants and Masterminds. I played another game not a lot of people have heard of called Mutant Year Zero. It's like a really cool post-apocalyptic game with weird mutations that your characters get
Mm-hmm.
to develop over time. And then eventually I found my way to D&D 5e,
Okay.
and I just fell in love with D&D because
Hmm.
it's you can do anything with D&D. There's really no restrictions. If you want to run a weird noir crime heavy drama, you can do that. If you want to do a high fantasy story, you can do that. And I think that's why I focused on D&D now, just because of how versatile it is and how amazing the community is.
Interesting. So you kind of skipped the early editions of D&D.
I
Is that
did, yeah. I
wow?
didn't come to D&D until much later.
I think
Yeah.
that's an interesting perspective to have. I know a lot of people, myself included, we tried the earlier editions. For me,
Mhm.
I tried it fourth edition first, and that didn't take, and then fifth edition really was just like, oh, this is great. Um,
Yeah.
but you came from so many different other game systems. It sounded like.
Mm.
Which was your favorite pre Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh man, that's hard to say because they each bring so much to the table. Like you
Mm-hmm.
have just I don't know. I don't think I could pick a favorite because they each have their own unique feel. Like with Vampire, you have just that amazing setting and atmosphere, and just I really loved all the different like subclasses you could do with Vampire.
Mm-hmm.
And then with Mutants and Masterminds, you really got to feel like you were playing in a comic book. Like they did such a good job of making you feel like you were a hero and getting you to uh, just really put you in that like over the top hero vibe. Obviously, I'm not. I deal with a lot of the mechanics for my content, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
very much more of a story driven and character driven player. So the mechanics, I'll just make them work. I'll force it. I'll beat that round peg into a square cog until it works. Um,
That's a common practice, I think, for a lot of
Absolutely.
people. We like being on the creative side, coming up with our own things. That's
Yeah.
Have you found that you bring in other mechanics or other things from these other game systems into Dungeons and Dragons at your tables?
I honestly, it's been a while since I played them, so I probably do
Mm-hmm.
subconsciously. But I will say, I'm glad you mentioned fourth edition because I've actually been going back and looking at some of the older editions
Mm-hmm.
and kind of cannibalizing their content for my fifth edition game. And Matt Coville, I absolutely love all his stuff. And one of the things he turned me on to was using fourth edition's skills challenges.
Yes.
So I've been using those in my fifth edition game.
That's really good. Those are really good. I actually recently published my first published module and included a segment that was meant to be kind of a skills challenge set up in that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because Matt Colville's stuff, he comes up with some really great things. And looking back, there are a lot of good mechanics in the earlier editions.
There
Besides
are. You just
skills, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say there are. I just you got to kind of pick and choose and don't get too bogged down in
Yeah.
them. I think because I
Have
know that
you
was a. Go ahead.
have you found any other favorite mechanics that you brought in other than the skills challenges?
I have not from D&D though. There's another system which I haven't played it. I've
Hmm.
only read it, but it's called Shadow of the Demon Lord.
Okay.
Um, it's a really like very brutal type RPG. It is
Mm.
by Robert Schwab as the designer. Definitely worth checking out. But they have two systems in there that I've tried integrating with mixed success so far. One is he has a Bane and Bless system
Huh.
where instead of if your character does something really good or if they get something if they get advantage on something, instead of just giving them that straight advantage where they get to roll twice, you can give them a blessing, which would be they just get to add a 1d6 to their roll.
Oh.
Same deal, like if they're trying to do something that's a little harder, like if they do a called shot,
Hmm.
so we're fighting a Cyclops and they want to try and hit the Cyclops in the eye, I will give them a Bane, which means
Hmm.
they have to roll a d6 and subtract that for that roll, just to kind of add that level of difficulty for what they're trying to pull off.
Nice.
Um,
So you've
and
been
that
trying to bring that in,
yeah,
huh?
yeah, and it's still we're still like play testing it to see how well it will work out in a 5e setting. The
Hmm.
other thing is his initiative system is really interesting, and I've always been trying a new initiative system just to keep combat flowing. And the way it works is he uses fast actions and slow actions. So every round you get the player characters always go first,
Mm-hmm.
and they can choose to either take a fast action or a slow action. Fast actions are limited; they can only do like certain things, and then after they take their fast actions, then the enemies who choose to do fast, they get their turn. And then if you choose to take a slow action, you get to do everything. So it would just be like a full turn. So I think it adds a little more strategy in there, but it's just hard to make those rules work with D&D because D&D has so many modifiers for like initiative and
Mm-hmm.
who gets to go at what point. So we're
Yeah.
still kind of play testing, putting that in our game.
Have you ever dived into the alternative rules in the Dungeon Master Guide and some of the stuff in there? Because I know
A
there
little
was,
bit.
yeah. Would have
Yeah,
you had any success running things with those?
I think as far as the initiative goes, I know there's that other system. I think it's the Greyhawk system. I don't
Mm-hmm.
remember, but it just seemed to overly complicate things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't do it much. I think we use flanking in our game
Mm-hmm.
to some extent, but usually I do my best to try and simplify things.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, always go with the rule of cool. So if something's fun and cool, we'll just figure out how to do it.
Yeah. That almost always wins in
Absolutely.
in my stuff as well. So you've been creating content and building. I'm gonna assume you're doing your own homebrew world
Yes,
because
yes.
just from when we've talked before, you just seem like that guy who likes to create everything. Um,
Absolutely. I have actually never ran a game out of the book. I've only done homebrew games. I've
mm-hmm.
played some out of the book, but I just running out of the book or out of like a set created story is just not really my style. I
Mm-hmm.
really like to come up with things and to create them and to build out my own world. Because then I never have to stop and flip through the book to see if I'm doing it right. I can just make it up, and if I'm not
Yeah.
doing it right, I'm the only one who knows.
Exactly. That's my joy in homebrewing as well. As I mentioned on a panel not long ago, I just don't like doing homework. And
Yeah, yeah.
homebrewing, you're not doing homework.
Nope,
You're
you just
creating
make
it.
it up.
Yeah.
And if you break your world, it's your world. You can break
Yeah.
it and put a band aid on it and keep going.
Exactly. And that is
Yep.
one of the great things. In that, in building your world, when you're preparing your game session, what is your process like in getting ready for a campaign session, for example?
Obviously, it depends on what we're doing, but
Mm-hmm.
in general, if I like to have a list of NPCs, and I got this from someone else, and I can't think of who, but basically, I just always keep a list of NPCs with just some basic information. I like to just have, excuse me, their race, um, not like head to toe how they look, but usually something about them that stands out. Like this girl, she has just a white streak of hair in the
Mm-hmm.
front, just something that makes them stand out, and then maybe a couple of words about how they should, their demeanor and how they should act and sound, and then something they want. And it could be simple. It could be as complicated as they are looking for their long lost brother that they haven't seen since they were children, or as simple as they want a sandwich. That could be very motivating to a guard. If you got a guard
Mm-hmm.
standing at a door and he just really wants a sandwich, that could be the whole story in itself.
Yeah.
And then, of course, with some of them, I will also add in there a secret. And sometimes I'm the only one who knows that secret. It
Mm-hmm.
just never comes out. But I like having that list because you never know what the players are going to do. You never know who they want to talk to. So if they
Mm-hmm.
just randomly say, I want to go talk to X, well, I just pull the list up and I can go from there.
Mm-hmm. So when you're
Uh,
making this list, are you creating these NPCs with specific like location they would be found, or is it more like a generic list that you can just pull from wherever the players are at?
A little bit of both. I
Okay.
usually like I'll have some of them will be tied to shops and to certain areas that they will be in, but others um, they'll be kind of floating. So yeah, I could just pull them for whenever. If I want to sort of railroad my players a certain way, then maybe instead of finding the baker at the bakery, they're gonna find the guard captain who I really wanted them to talk to. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, just little tricks of the trade to get
Yeah.
them to move along the story.
Very cool. That's a really good tip. Just having that extra little bit, and with your
Mhm.
Instagram stuff, having one of your mini tables on hand would be really handy. Do you use those in your own games as well?
A little bit. I know my players, they follow my Instagram, so I try
Oh,
to, yeah, I always try to come up with new content that they don't expect. But yeah, I definitely use some. I actually, despite the fact that I create random tables, I don't use a lot of random tables because I'm a little bit of a control freak. I like to control what's going to happen,
uh-huh.
or at least to an extent. But
Right.
I definitely have pulled in some, especially some of the characters I put on there and some of the villains and pets and stuff.
Nice. So that makes it a lot easier to just create content if you're just throwing that in your game. Um,
Yes.
Thinking about tabletop role playing games in general and not Dungeons and Dragons specifically, what was it that originally hooked you into the hobby?
I think it just scratches every itch. It allows me to be social. It allows me to be creative, and it allows me to just have fun. While also being challenging. So not only do I get to hang out with my friends and have some drinks and play a game together, we also get to tell a story together, which is probably the most powerful thing about it, in my opinion, because like to this day, like we still tell stories about some of our earlier adventures and some of the crazy stuff we did and went through,
Mm-hmm.
and so not only do we get to have this social time together and we get to have this fun, we're also creating this adventure together and creating these memories together. And that's really powerful to me. It has definitely brought me closer to some of my friends and obviously to all of you. It's introduced me to this whole wonderful, amazing community. So anytime I get to play a game or run a game, we're just making these awesome memories together.
Yeah, that is a really good. That's a great perspective to have. That kind of gets overlooked. The memories and the stories you make. Because how long have you been playing in let's say your longest running campaign right now?
My current longest campaigns are running at about 2 years right now.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
That's
we're
really
really happy.
good.
Yeah, and that is, I've running two that's at 2 years, and I'm playing in one that's at 2 years.
Nice.
Yeah, so
That's a
we're
feat right there.
yeah. It's been a lot of fun.
Hmm.
We've really thoroughly enjoyed it.
So looking back at your games, the ones you've been in and the ones you've ran for the last 2 years, what is your favorite story?
Oh man. Okay, so this is probably several stories kind of wrapped into one, but
All right.
there's by players I was running them through their first like dungeon, and
Okay.
they were going down into a dwarven mine that had been abandoned and taken over by some malevolent force, and that malevolent force was keeping the spirits of all the dead dwarves trapped there, so it was haunted as well. And the very first thing I had for them was this door puzzle that they had to get through. And there was a ghost that kind of sort of helped them get the idea of what they were supposed to do. And I can't remember the rhyme specifically, but there was a rhyme that kind of told them they were supposed to put something in this circular shaped hole in the door. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I described the circular shaped hole as having what looked like teeth coming out inside the hole. And there was a dead body laying at the foot of this. Uh, the answer to the riddle was you were supposed to put a tongue in the hole, and the mouth of the hole was going to grab it. So they figured out the riddle. They're like, "Oh yeah, we got to put a tongue in there." My intent was that they were to cut the tongue off out of the dead body and then put it in there. Uh,
Okay.
I, I should caveat this with I play very dark games.
Mm-hmm.
I'm usually a bit brutal, so that they got it, and I was proud of them. However, instead of taking the bait I left them, the wizard goes and just shoves his tongue in the hole. And immediately I was like, "Are you sure you're doing this?" He said, "Yeah, I'm just gonna shove my tongue." All right. I was like, "You just feel the searing pain as it clamps down on your tongue and severs it." And I was like, "The door opens, but you no longer have a tongue." And I initially, I will say this is a great way to. Sometimes you have to back off a little bit
Mm-hmm.
because he could do what he did. solve the puzzle. So I could have been really harsh. And initially I was like, all right, well, you're not going to be able to cast any spells that require a verbal component because you can't form words correctly.
Yeah.
And then we realized all of his spells had a verbal component. So I told him, I was like, listen, you can still cast spells, but you have to talk like this for the entire adventure. And he did, and so I gave it to him. He still got to cast the spells, but we had a lot of fun role playing him without a tongue. And the funniest part is they were going through this because they're looking for a very powerful healer. So eventually he did find the healer and he got his tongue back.
Oh, that's good to know.
But immediately after that, I had this scene inside the dungeon, which again, this was a dwarven mining facility, so they had things like a bar inside, and they went inside this old abandoned bar, and a ghost of the dwarven bartender appeared. It was very jovial, really nice, and he had this just really powerful, nice axe on his wall. And he said that he would be happy to give one of them the axe if they could beat him in a drinking competition. So the barbarian agreed, of course, and the barbarian sits down to have this drinking competition with this dwarven ghost, and then they realize the ghost's like, well, this isn't fair. I don't have a real body. I'll obviously win. So he's like, if one of you will let me possess you, just let me possess your body, and then I'll use your body for the competition. So the bard was kind enough to allow him to possess his body. So the dwarf ghost possesses the body of the bard, and then I had the barbarian, and I rolled different. I think we're doing those constitution checks while they both had a drinking competition, and I think it was 5 rounds, and the first round the barbarian rolled like a nat 20. Like he just got way ahead. He was killing it all the way up until the very last round. It kind of got a little closer, and then he rolled a nat 1. The barbarian rolled a nat 1, and I was like, well, you fall off your stool, you fall down, and the deal was that if the ghost won, then the PC would always remember his name. That was the deal. It was like, if the ghost wins, you're going to always remember my name. So the ghost name was Bearheart. So to make sure that the barbarian never forgot his name, he gave him a tramp stamp tattoo of his name on the barbarian. So the barbarian got Bearheart magically tattooed right above his ass. And then, for being a good sport, the ghost ended up giving his axe to the bard for letting him possess him. Nice. So yeah, within the first session of being in the dungeon, 2 of my players had their bodies completely altered.
Yeah, it was a little wild.
Yeah, we had a great time. Still messing with the barbarian about that. And so that's the game we're still currently playing. So he still has Bearheart tattooed over his
on
butt.
Him. That's amazing. That makes for some really great memories that, like, they'll probably be talking about that years from now, being like, remember when you got that tramp stamp?
Yep.
So my question, following up on that, is how do you get the players so invested in the game that they go along with that kind of crazy antics?
I think there is a lot of you get a lot of mirroring behavior. If you are into it, your players will be into it. So I do my best to, I'm not the greatest at doing voices, but I do my best to like put a lot of energy out there and to really invest myself in the characters that I'm presenting to them, and then they will do the same right back at it. So I made, with the bar scene where they were drinking, I made a big deal out of, making the Ghost was very jovial and friendly, and when he was drinking, he was getting intoxicated and slurring and kind of falling over, and they just ate that up and they got invested as well. Another thing I really love doing is creating moral quandaries for them to deal with.
Oh, yeah.
And when you really throw in there and you test their morality, and you put some skin in the game where they know that there's real consequence, and not necessarily like, oh, your characters might die or get hurt. No, now it's you. If you don't do this, then this whole village might die. Like your choices have consequences. I think that's one of the biggest things, is to show them that yes, you guys can be murder hobos, or you can be just crazy bards, or you can be whatever you want to be, but whatever you decide will have consequences on the world around you.
Mhm.
And when they start to see that come alive, I feel like that's what really draws them in.
That's a really good point because a moral quandary that's impactful like that is a huge. That's a big way to show the players that like you matter to the story. Your choices are
Yeah,
important. Um,
absolutely.
Building on that, what are some of like your favorite moral quandaries that you've given players? So this is so other
All right.
DMs can steal the ideas from you.
Okay,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, this one is going to paint my players in a bit of a rough light. So I will say, please just give them the benefit of the doubt. They do eventually kind of redeem themselves.
Right. They
Um,
made their choice.
yeah. So the world we're playing in, it all started out when there's this really vicious civil war going on, and all of my players are deserters from both sides of the war who have kind of joined up to form this bandit group. And they're kind of outlaws. They don't want to be a part of the war anymore. And they're
Mm-hmm.
called the Bastards of War. So they have kind of formed their own little gang. Well, this was our very first session together. It was
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be a one shot, and it ended up growing from that because we really loved the characters in the story. But the one shot was that they had just saved the leader of their gang. He had been caught up by the law, and they were trying to make some money quick so they could get out of town. Well, there's a basically an accountant in the game, and I stole most of this from Red Dead Redemption. But
Nice.
the accountant says, "Look, I've been loaning money out all over town. It's time to collect. So go collect this money so we can get out of here."
Mm-hmm.
So the whole one shot we did was them going to collect money from all these people that owed money to the gang. The first one was a shopkeeper who was um, he was down on his luck. He was a blacksmith, and he was just getting harassed by the soldiers who were forcing him to make arms for the war without paying him. So they got to see like he was struggling in his business. He was struggling dealing with these guys. So I gave them that choice. I was like, "Are you going to hit him up for the money, or are you going to help him defend himself against these soldiers? If you do that, then you might bring more heat down on the gang. You know, what are you going to do?" And I think with that, they ended up kind of defending him a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't able to get any money because he didn't have any, but he did give them some weapons in exchange. So they made it that a bit peacefully there.
Mm-hmm.
But then I sent them out to this farmhouse, and I told them, I was like, "Listen, I need you to collect money from the Joad family. They tried to pay us back with fake coins, so make an example."
Oh.
Um, so I sent them out to the Joad family's farm estate, and they go out there, and it's just this woman by herself, and she, of course, she tries to lie to them at first, saying, "Well, I gave you the money and all that." And they immediately like busted the door, and they are like, "No, you didn't. You gave us fake money." So they start searching the house to try and find her valuables. Well, they find her husband laid up in bed with only one leg. And she says, "My husband went off to the war. He came back crippled, and he hasn't been able to tend the farm. So that's why we had to borrow the money."
Mm-hmm.
And again, they were like, "Well, the boss said for us to go make an example." So they ended up finding her some jewels and stuff that she had. And she was like, "Those are family heirlooms. You know, that's why I was holding on to them." And so again, they're like, "No, this is ours now." And then they heard a noise come from the back room.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they went into the back room, and they saw there was a little girl who was hiding outside, peering in the window. And one of them's like, "Well, I'm going to grab her and pull her inside." So I was like, "All right." Well, he rolled really well, or really terribly to grab her, but really well on his strength to pull her in. So I had him grab her, and then he just rips her through the window. So it just shatters glass on this little girl and cuts her to pieces. So they basically are terrorizing this
Yeah.
farmhouse family. And they ended up getting, they stole the jewels from them. And they're like, "Well, they did say make an example." And so the barbarian just goes and kills the little girl in front of her parents. and he rolled so well. The way I put it, I think I said, is you accordioned her body with your ball. Um, and then they ended up slaughtering the rest of the family, and that's how we started off the game. So
Wow.
yeah, that was the moral choice they decided to make, and
That
then they ended up having the entire like community's law enforcement chasing them down, and they ended up being betrayed by someone they thought was a friend and turned over to the law. And they spent about 5 or 6 sessions in prison after that. So it was crazy and surprising, but just I wouldn't change anything about it at all. Like I'm so glad they killed that kid.
that's
It was horrible.
insane.
Yeah,
But that also
absolutely.
illustrates you showed an interesting technique there in giving that moral quandaries. It's always, you have multiple missions, or a seemingly straightforward mission is then kind of derailed or diverted by the other side of the story. That's kind of an interesting tactic that I haven't
Mhm.
talked about with anyone else on that about that one. Um, so
Yeah,
that's
that's the most
really,
important thing. Is it can be a linear. It can seem linear, but choices have to matter.
yeah.
That's the biggest thing.
And then you said they ended up in jail for 5 sessions,
Yeah, for
right?
quite a while. Yeah, I pretty much I put them in a prison, and I didn't tell them anything. I told them you're in prison. If you want to escape, there might be a way. And I just kind of let them explore this prison for a while until they figured out a way to escape.
Interesting, because
Um,
that leads to like a lot of times a prison is just, oh, you're in a prison and that's it, and but then you were still able to give them the choices and they were able to figure out how to escape from that prison.
mhm.
Took them 5 sessions, but they got out, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. Yeah, and
um,
I didn't. It wasn't like a punishment thing. I did continue the story. Like there was story elements going on inside the prison that
mhm.
helped to push along the story as well.
Okay.
Um, so it's the prison. It was a prison. It was a war prison. So there were other soldiers in there that they were dealing with, and then there's this whole uh, behind the scenes of the war and everything going on. There's this malevolent force that's kind of pushing things, just a very big evil bad guy basically. And so they discovered that there was people in the prison that were experimenting on these prisoners. So they got to push forward the story a little bit by
Mhm.
discovering all of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So obviously you're very have a creative mind where you're able to build these kind of situations for players to be in, and you can get the players in there. But I really want to know now is, what is your biggest struggle as a game master?
Oh wow. One thing is certainly keeping up voices. I tend to start off strong and then just I halfway through I'll forget like what voice I was doing, or I'll get wrapped up in other things.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is I sometimes I have a tendency to go too big. I always love the idea of having more than one bad guy. I
Mm-hmm.
think it makes things far more interesting. But then I will start I have a problem of piling on to where I was like, I know things going on like 7 layers deep, and I have to remember, like, well, my players don't know all this. I got to pull it back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I sometimes struggle with maybe overcomplicating things and throwing out too much at once. And I'm definitely trying to reel that back in. A perfect example of that is I had my players are at a point where they're now trying to sort of build up a resistance so that they can try and end the war, and I had a mission. It was just a side mission where they're supposed to go and get a caravan and bring it back safely to the city that they have kind of set up as a safe haven. Excuse me. Um, and I just had this idea for a city that was all based on, well, a town that was all based on like folklore and fables and stuff. And so then I got on Incarnate and I started making this town with like, uh, you know, the three pigs' houses were out in the woods, and then you had Goldilocks' tower, and then Cinderella's castle, and I just started putting all this stuff in there, and then what was supposed to take them like 1 session ended up taking them like 5, and it definitely made it a far longer experience than it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Well, I mean, we still had fun with it. It was still interesting, but I certainly am my own biggest critic when it comes to just going overboard with some storylines.
I think we've all kind of been there. That's a common, at least I know for beginner DMs, that's a common thing too, is you want to map out the whole story so
Mm.
well and perfectly for the players. And then we also know that the players, at the first chance they get to make a decision that's not what you had in mind, they will.
Oh yeah,
Somehow they'll
absolutely.
come up with
Yes.
things. So my
Yeah.
question there is, when you have this story built out, how do you keep the players invested and interested in the story without feeling like you're railroading them or taking away their choice?
Um, I definitely one really great thing is to use their backstories. That's why it's really important to get a good backstory from your players as best you can, and make their players personally invested. So, like for instance, instead of going to go and save uh, the old man who got lost on the roadway and didn't bring the candles into town like he was supposed to, you can just simply say, "Hey, this guy was supposed to bring these candles in. By the way, he's your uncle. For whatever reason, he didn't show up."
Mm-hmm.
Or if one of your players has um, a history with a thieves guild, and they said that, yeah, I used to work for a thieves guild. I know that's a common like backstory, and I was like, well, what happened? Why didn't you? Why don't you work with them anymore? Well, you know what? You haven't checked in with the thieves guild in a while. This
Mm-hmm.
mission right here is actually from the thieves guild, and they want to know what you've been doing. Why haven't you been helping out like you're supposed to?
Mm-hmm.
So I try and pull in their backstories and just mesh them in with the stories I have in mind to kind of make them more personally invested. That, and I think character development, not
Mm-hmm.
only for your PCs but your NPCs. If you can create some NPCs your characters care about and they want to be involved with and they want to do missions for, then they'll be more interested in doing whatever it is you had in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
How do you go about planning that kind of things for the NPCs, a character development? What is that process like?
I try and do it in relation to the PCs. Like I'm not, I don't have like just thousands and thousands of scripts where
Mm-hmm.
these NPCs' lives are developing. I only do it like in instances where the PCs and the NPCs are having experiences together. The way I kind of have mine set up is obviously they're part the PCs are part of this gang. They're part of the Bastards of War, so they're constantly doing missions with the other NPCs, and things are happening that will kind of develop who they are and their relationships together.
Mm-hmm.
I think actually a perfect example is when they got betrayed and ended up going into the prison. Well, that all started with they were surrounded, and their boss, who they had just saved his life, he ended up throwing himself in front of them to save them, and he lost his arm in the process. So once they got out of the prison, they were extremely motivated to help him and save him, and so now he only has one arm, but he sacrificed that for them. So now they care a lot about him.
Yeah.
And now if he comes to them saying, "Hey, this is what I need to do," then they're all about it. That's what they want
Mm-hmm.
to do because they have that relationship with him.
That is a really good tip right there. That's something I hadn't thought of that myself so much. I do the thing where I come up with, oh, the world's moving, and I'll come up with different things people are doing, but I honestly hadn't come up with the idea that, maybe if this NPC has a strong moment with the characters, that can come into play and influence the characters' decisions later. That's a really great way to think about it. It seems so
Yeah.
obvious, but
Yeah. Oh
I
no,
hadn't. So
that's why we have these
yeah,
conversations.
that's a
Yeah.
really cool idea that
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to steal from you for sure.
Absolutely. And then later on, when you really want to mess with them, just put that NPC in a life and death situation,
Yeah.
or take that NPC away from them, just kill them off. And then you want to really make them hate a bad guy, kill that NPC.
Yeah, that's
Watch them.
play with their heartstrings in that case.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
so the last question, I mentioned it in the email. I just wanted to get from you your number one tip for new dungeon masters.
Yes, this would be my tip for new, old, for anyone who enjoys this game, and it goes right along with what we were just saying, and that is to embrace the chaos, um, and to remember that this isn't just your game as a dungeon master, but it's also not just player's game either.
Mm-hmm.
This is your story that you're telling together. So when your players go way off the rails and they start doing things that you didn't plan for or making decisions that you didn't see coming, which is going to be often because there's
Mm-hmm.
no way you can ever expect everything.
Yeah.
Embrace it. Just embrace that chaos. The way I look at it is when my players make a decision that I never saw coming, that is their way of challenging me. We challenge our players by throwing high CR monsters at them and crazy puzzles. Um, the way they challenge us is by making those crazy decisions and by going off the rails. And the dice, always the dice. The dice will always challenge all of you.
Mm-hmm.
But just that's why we have that there. That's why they have the will that we give them. They have the will to do whatever they want. That's what makes the game amazing. And that's why we have the dice to add in that chaos. So embrace the chaos and take that as your challenge. So when my players do something that I didn't see coming, I just accept that as my challenge. Now I have to figure out what's going to happen next. Where are we going? So instead of looking at it as a pain that, oh no, they're not going
Yeah.
down the way I want, I'm like, well, no, this is my challenge. This is what I have to figure out. This is my part of the game. And I love it. That's my favorite part, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I have tons of really well scripted. I think they're well scripted stories, but when we go off the rails, it's wonderful because that's my chance to be challenged and to see where we can go and what I can make of it.
That is a really great perspective. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
Because DMs, we're supposed to challenge our players all the time. That's like our thing, but that's a great way to think about it. And like they're there to challenge us too and push us and get
Absolutely.
our help us perfect our craft. Um, Chase, it looks like we didn't get any questions, but that's okay.
No
Last
worries.
thing, where can everyone find you on the internet? I want to know about your Instagram, about all the streams you're on. Where can people find
Yes.
you?
Stream wise, you can find me on Twitch on Fridays. At usually we try to start around 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I am in a game called At Hell's Gate with Lady Tiefling as the DM. It's awesome. We're going through Avernus, and we actually just ended up in Avernus, so things are getting hot. Um, you can mostly find most of my content on Instagram.
Okay.
I'm trying to post a little bit more on Twitter. And then if you want to support me or you want to get some extra content, like I have a really nice downloadable PDF of all those D100 tables, you can find me on Patreon. And all those Instagram, Twitter, and Patreon, it's all at rollanat20, ROLLANAT20.
Nice.
And if you don't mind, I was going to plug. I haven't posted in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Life's been chaotic for all of us, but I actually have some new content I'm working on, and this is going to be my exclusive announcement of this new content right here, right
Awesome.
now. I am working on what I call dungeon bites. They are basically bite-sized dungeons that you can pick up and put into any story you want. I'm going to have a small map that is included with them, and I'm going to have a bunch of little encounters that you can find in them. And I'm going to pretty much tailor all of my previous content within the framework of a dungeon. So, for instance, the first dungeon is going to be the tomb of he who would be God, and it is the tomb where this really powerful human once tried to make himself a god, and he was locked inside there. So I'm going to have a shop that is related to that. I will have some villains related to it, some random roll tables, and it's all going to be in the framework of this little bite-sized dungeon that you can take and put in play for if you have a one-shot that you didn't know
Mm-hmm.
you were going to be running, or if you just want to throw something new at your players. And that's what all my content's going to be going forward. Is I'm just going to have these little dungeons that I'm posting about. The first one, I will post all of it for free on my Patreon, and then I'll post each individual thing, like the shops and the individual instances and encounters. I'll be posting on my Instagram as well.
Wow, that sounds epic. So
Also, I hope it is.
that sounds like a big endeavor, a big project that you're tackling there.
Yeah, definitely. It should be the next
Which,
few weeks. I'll post about it.
yeah, so we're gonna have to look forward to that, and then later we'll have to have you come on again, and we'll do a follow up and find out how that's going. that would
Awesome.
be
I'll be
really
more than
fun, I
happy.
think. Yeah. Oh, and now Cameron shows up from the D&D Coalition. Hey,
What's up,
Cameron.
Cameron?
But that's our show. Chase, thank you once again for coming on and chatting with me. That was really great, insightful perspectives on a lot of things that sometimes we just take for granted as DMs, and sometimes we just forget. I know you reminded me of a lot of things, so I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and viewers, the few of you out there, remember to subscribe to the channel. Check out Chase. All his links are in the description of this video, so you can check him out and see what he's up to. And definitely check out his upcoming little dungeon bites, because that sounds like it's going to be amazing.
Awesome.
That being said, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, and have a good weekend.
Yeah. See you guys. Hey, be safe. Thanks.